Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Observer. Clayton King had always been a man who noticed details. 8 years in military intelligence, followed by a decade in cybersecurity, had trained him to see patterns where others saw chaos, to hear the lie beneath the truth. That skill had saved lives overseas and built him a comfortable career in Austin. It had also, 6 months ago, destroyed his marriage, or rather, revealed it was already dead. He sat at his desk in the home office, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating his face at 11 p.m. Daisy was asleep upstairs. Melinda was at another late showing, the third one this week. He pulled up the location data from the tracking app he'd installed on her phone under the guise of family safety. Not the luxury condo on West 6th she'd claimed. Instead, a townhouse in Clarksville he'd never heard her mention. Clayton leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin. He was 38, lean and composed, with the kind of quiet intensity that made people think twice before lying to him. His dark hair had threads of silver now, and his gray eyes missed nothing. The affair itself didn't shock him. Melinda had grown distant over the past year, their conversations reduced to logistics about Daisy's schedule and household maintenance. What shocked him was his own calm. No rage, no heartbreak, just a cold, analytical assessment of the situation. Perhaps he'd known, on some level, for longer than 6 months. His phone buzzed. Leon Neal, his best friend since college and now his attorney. "You still up?" Leon's voice was rough with sleep. "Always. What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just wanted to check on you before the weekend. You still planning that family brunch Sunday?" Clayton smiled without humor. "Absolutely. It's going to be memorable." A pause. "Clay, whatever you're planning, it's legal. Mostly. And it's necessary." He kept his voice low. "I need to know how bad this is before I make decisions about Daisy's future." "You're sure about the tail you hired?" "Kirk Morton's the best. Former FBI. If there's more to find, he'll find it." After hanging up, Clayton returned to his monitors. The primary screen showed the security feed from his home, 4 cameras covering every entrance. The second displayed financial records he'd meticulously categorized. The third screen was why he couldn't sleep. It showed documents Kirk had uncovered 3 days ago. Life insurance policies, 2 of them, both on Clayton, both recently increased to $2.5 million each. Nothing illegal about that, except Melinda had forged his signature on the beneficiary change forms. And the second policy, the one she'd taken out secretly, had a double indemnity clause for accidental death. Clayton had seen enough operational planning in his military days to recognize a setup when he saw one. Chapter 2. 6 months ago. March 15th. The discovery had been almost mundane. Clayton came home early from a conference in Dallas, a day ahead of schedule. Melinda's car was in the driveway, alongside a black Escalade he didn't recognize. He'd parked down the street, his training kicking in automatically. Something felt wrong. He approached the house on foot, using the side gate to access the backyard. Through the kitchen window, he saw them. Melinda and a man Clayton had never seen, broad-shouldered, early 40s, wearing expensive casual clothes. They weren't in an embrace or anything cinematic. Instead, they sat at the kitchen island with papers spread between them, heads close together, intimate in a way that suggested months, not days, of familiarity. Clayton took photos with his phone, zoomed in on the papers. His mind cataloged details. The man's tag Hoyer watch, the Colorado Rockies tattoo on his forearm, the confident way he touched Melinda's hand. He'd left without confronting them, driven to a coffee shop, and made 2 calls. First to Leon, explaining he needed discretion and legal advice. Second to Kirk Morton, a PI he'd met through work who owed him a favor from a corporate security consultation. "I need to know everything about someone," Clayton had said, "and I need it done quietly." Kirk had delivered within 48 hours. The man was Sergio Briggs, 42, a licensed private investigator who'd been fired from the Austin PD 8 years ago for evidence tampering. He ran a security consulting firm that mostly served personal injury lawyers and wealthy clients involved in messy divorces. His reputation was ugly, Witnesses who changed their stories, evidence that disappeared, accusations of intimidation. "This guy's dirty, Clay," Kirk had said over whiskey at a quiet bar. "Whatever your wife's involved with, it's not good." The surveillance had begun. Clayton learned that Melinda and Sergio had been meeting for 7 months. He learned that Sergio had connections to several unsolved accidental deaths in Travis County, wealthy men whose widows had been his clients or associates. He learned that Melinda had been lying about property showings, client meetings, even her book club. And then, 2 months into his investigation, Kirk uncovered the insurance policies. "Clay, you need to go to the cops," Kirk urged. But Clayton shook his head. "Not yet. I need to understand the full scope. And I need evidence that will hold up, not just suspicions." "You think they're planning to kill you?" "I think they're planning to make it look like an accident. I think Sergio's done this before and gotten away with it. And I think if I move too soon, Melinda gets spooked, lawyers up, and Daisy ends up in the middle of a custody nightmare while I'm looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life." Clayton's voice had been ice. "No, I'm going to let them think they're winning. I'm going to document everything. And when they make their move, I'm going to destroy them both." Chapter 3, The Architect. Over the next 4 months, Clayton became a ghost in his own life. He played the oblivious husband perfectly, working late, asking Melinda about her day with genuine seeming interest, taking Daisy to soccer practice every Saturday morning. Inside, he was building a case that would end Sergio Briggs and free him from a marriage built on lies. His sister Beth Montgomery, a detective with Austin PD's fraud division, had been his first real ally once he explained the situation. "Jesus, Clay," she'd whispered over coffee at her kitchen table, reading through the files. "This is attempted murder conspiracy. Attempted won't put them away long enough. I need the actual attempt, documented and airtight." Beth's jaw tightened. She was 2 years younger than Clayton, with the same sharp eyes and protective instincts. "You're using yourself as bait. I'm controlling the environment. There's a difference." She wanted to argue, but recognized the look on his face. She'd seen it before, when Clayton was 17 and spent 3 months gathering evidence to expose their stepfather's abuse, presenting it to CPS and a family court judge with such precision that the man never got within 100 yards of them again. "What do you need from me?" Beth asked. "Information on Sergio's previous cases. The ones Kirk flagged. I need to establish pattern and motive." Beth had delivered. 3 wealthy men, all dead within 18 months of meeting Sergio through their wives. All ruled accidents, a fall downstairs, a drowning, a car crash. All had substantial life insurance. None of the widows were ever investigated seriously. "The guy's careful," Beth said. "He uses accidents that could plausibly happen. No poisons, no obvious violence." Clayton studied the files. "So we make sure this time it's not plausible. We make it obvious." The plan took shape like a military operation. Clayton identified the likely method: food poisoning at a public restaurant, severe enough to cause a fatal reaction given his known shellfish allergy. He'd noticed Melinda asking unusual questions about his EpiPen, whether he carried it everywhere, how quickly it worked. 2 weeks ago, Kirk had intercepted a text between Melinda and Sergio discussing the brunch plan. They were getting impatient. The insurance policies had been active for 90 days, past the contestability period. Clayton set the stage. He suggested Sunday brunch at Olivia's, an upscale bistro where Melinda had mentioned wanting to try. He made sure to mention he'd probably order the special, which, he confirmed with the chef, included shellfish in the sauce. Then he briefed Daisy. His daughter sat across from him at the kitchen table on Wednesday evening, her brown eyes, so much like his own, serious and attentive. At 9 years old, she had her father's observational skills and her mother's charm. Though Clayton prayed, she'd inherited none of Melinda's capacity for deception. "Pumpkin, we need to talk about something important. Something scary, but I need you to be brave." Daisy straightened. "Is it about Mom and that man?" Clayton's heart stopped. "What man?" "The one who comes to the house sometimes when you're at work. I don't like him. He smiles weird." She paused. "Are you getting divorced?" Clayton pulled her into a hug, his mind racing. "Yes, probably. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is that Mom and that man might try to hurt me. Daisy pulled back, eyes wide. Like hurt? Yes. So I've been making a plan to stop them. But I need your help on Sunday at brunch. Can you do something very important for me? She nodded solemnly. Clayton explained the text message code. If she received a message that said, "Say nothing, stand up and walk away," she needed to excuse herself immediately and go to the car. Uncle Leon would be waiting in the parking lot. She'd be safe, and Clayton would handle the rest. What about you? Daisy asked, voice small. I'll be right behind you. I promise. This is just to make sure everyone sees what happens next, that they can't lie about it later. Is Aunt Beth helping too? Yes. And Uncle Leon and Mr. Morton. We're all keeping you safe and making sure the bad guys can't hurt anyone else. Daisy processed this with remarkable composure. Okay, I can do that. But Dad, yeah. After this is over, can we get a dog? Despite everything, Clayton laughed. Absolutely. Now, Sunday morning, Clayton stood in the bathroom going through his final checklist. The micro camera in his shirt button was active, recording everything. The restaurant security footage had been enhanced by a tech contact, higher resolution, backed up to a cloud server Clayton controlled. Beth had 2 plainclothes officers seated nearby, ready to respond. Kirk Morton was at a table with a clear view of the kitchen, tracking the staff. And in Clayton's pocket was the real game changer, a small device that, when activated, would trigger every sprinkler in the restaurant. Not illegal, just a fire safety test that the restaurant owner, who owed Clayton a favor from a security audit, had agreed to at this specific time. The chaos would force everyone's hands. It would create the perfect moment for Sergio or his accomplice to make their move, and for Clayton to document it all. Melinda appeared in the doorway, wearing a cream sundress and a smile that might have fooled him once. Ready? We should get going. I made reservations for 11. Absolutely, Clayton said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. I have a feeling today's going to change everything. Chapter 4, The Trigger. Olivia's was busy for a Sunday, filled with families enjoying the late September weather on the patio. Clayton, Melinda, and Daisy were seated at a prime table near the windows. Melinda's request, Clayton noted. Good sight lines for witnesses. Daisy sat across from him, her menu open but her eyes on Clayton. She was wearing the purple dress she'd picked out herself, her hair in the braided style she favored for special occasions. To anyone watching, she was a normal 9-year-old at brunch with her parents. Only Clayton saw the tension in her small shoulders. Melinda was radiant, chatting about a property she'd shown yesterday, her hand occasionally touching Clayton's arm, playing the devoted wife. He wondered if she felt anything, guilt, hesitation, fear. Her performance was flawless. The special looks amazing, Melinda said, scanning the menu. Lobster ravioli with a shellfish reduction. Oh, but you can't have that, honey. Your allergy. I brought my EpiPen, Clayton said casually. Maybe I'll risk it. Melinda's smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened on her water glass. That seems dangerous. Why don't you get the steak instead? You're probably right. Clayton set down his menu. Through the window, he spotted Kirk Morton at an outdoor table, newspaper open. 2 tables away, he recognized one of Beth's officers, a woman in running gear, sipping coffee. The waiter arrived. Melinda ordered the special. Clayton ordered the steak, medium rare. Daisy requested chicken fingers with extra ranch. Actually, Melinda said as the waiter turned to leave, could you make sure the steak is very well done? He's had some stomach issues lately. Clayton raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Interesting. Overcooking would mask certain additions to the meat. He made a mental note. 15 minutes passed. Small talk. Daisy played a word game on her tablet. Melinda excused herself to the restroom twice. Nervous energy or coordination with Sergio, Clayton wasn't sure. Each time, he watched the kitchen through the partial view window from their table. At 11:32, Clayton saw him. Sergio Briggs, wearing kitchen staff clothing, slipping through the back entrance. Clayton's chest tightened. The arrogance of it, doing this himself rather than using an intermediary. Sergio must have felt invincible. Clayton pulled out his phone under the table and activated the camera recording app, angling it to capture the dining room. Then he sent the pre-written text to Daisy's phone. Say nothing. Stand up and walk away. He watched his daughter's screen light up. She read the message, her face going pale, genuinely pale, though she knew this was coming. She was a natural actress. Excuse me, Daisy whispered, her voice barely audible. I need to now. She stood and walked toward the exit, not running but moving with clear urgency. Several nearby diners glanced up. Melinda frowned. Daisy? Honey. Clayton's own phone buzzed. The same message. He read it. Let his face register confusion and concern, then stood. Something's wrong. I need to. What are you talking about? Melinda grabbed his wrist. Clayton, sit down. She probably just needs the bathroom. Let go of me, Melinda. Their waiter approached with a tray. Your meals are. Not now, Clayton said, pulling his arm free from Melinda's grip. He strode toward the exit, his heart pounding not with fear, but with cold anticipation. Everything was moving exactly as planned. He reached the parking lot. Leon's BMW was there, Daisy visible in the back seat, safe. Leon gave Clayton a thumbs up. Phase 1 complete. Clayton checked his watch. For minutes since the text, he'd given Melinda and Sergio enough time to think he'd actually left, enough time for them to commit. He turned back toward the restaurant. That's when he heard it. Melinda's scream, piercing and theatrical, carrying through the open patio doors. Help! Someone help! My husband's food. There's something wrong. Clayton broke into a run, Kirk and the plainclothes officers converging simultaneously. He burst through the doors to see Melinda standing at their table, both hands covering her mouth, staring at his plate. The steak sat in a pool of blood and sauce. Next to it, clearly visible to everyone in the now silent restaurant, was a syringe, half empty, needles still glistening. It was so obvious, so blatant, that several people had their phones out recording. Melinda had made a critical error. In her panic at Clayton's unexpected departure, she'd grabbed the syringe Sergio must have prepared and tried to use it herself, right there in the open. No subtlety, no plausible accident, just a woman with a syringe and her husband's poison meal. Ma'am, step away from the table. Beth's officer approached, badge out. Austin PD. Melinda spun. I just found it. Someone tried to poison my husband. Oh God, Clayton. She reached for him, tears streaming now. Clayton stepped back. Don't touch me. What? No, baby, I'm trying to help. Where's Sergio? Clayton asked calmly. Every trace of color drained from Melinda's face. Who? Sergio Briggs. The man you've been sleeping with for 7 months. The man currently dressed as kitchen staff, somewhere in this restaurant. Clayton's voice carried across the silent patio. The man who helped you plan to murder me for $5 million in insurance money. The restaurant manager appeared, phone to his ear. Police are on the way, and we have a Sergio Briggs trying to leave through the back. Our sous chef is detaining him. Kirk Morton stepped forward, pulling out his PI license and a folder thick with documents. I have photographic evidence of Mrs. King and Mr. Briggs conducting surveillance on Mr. King, insurance fraud documentation, and communication record discussing this exact plan. Melinda's mouth opened and closed. The transformation was remarkable. The loving wife persona crumbled, replaced by something desperate and trapped. You set this up. You knew. You. I protected myself and my daughter from 2 people trying to kill me, Clayton said. Everything here was your choice, Melinda. Every step of it. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Chapter 5. Unraveling. The interrogation room at Austin PD was deliberately uncomfortable. Harsh lighting, hard chairs, a table bolted to the floor. Clayton sat across from Detective Philip Santiago, Beth partner in the fraud division, with Leon beside him. Through the one-way glass, he knew Beth was watching. Walk me through it again, Santiago said, his voice neutral. From the beginning, Clayton had given his statement twice already, but he understood the process. This was about establishing a timeline, finding inconsistencies, and determining whether he'd crossed any legal lines in his counter-operation. 6 months ago, I discovered my wife was having an affair, Clayton began. I hired a licensed private investigator, Kirk Morton, to gather information. During his investigation, we discovered evidence that Melinda and her lover, Sergio Briggs, were planning to kill me and collect on life insurance policies. Why didn't you come to police then? Because I had suspicions, not proof. And because I'd researched Sergio Briggs. He's suspected in 3 other similar deaths: wealthy husbands, accidental deaths, insurance payouts. But there was never enough evidence to prosecute. Leon interjected smoothly. My client wanted to ensure that when charges were filed, they would stick. He also wanted to protect his daughter from a prolonged custody battle with a woman plotting murder. Santiago flipped through his notes. So you set up the brunch scenario? The text message to your daughter, that was planned. It was a safety protocol. If I felt threatened, I could get Daisy to safety while ensuring witnesses saw what happened next. You expected your wife to attempt something at the restaurant? I expected Sergio to attempt something with Melinda's knowledge. What I didn't expect was for Melinda to panic and expose their plan so blatantly. Clayton's expression remained calm. The syringe on my plate wasn't subtle. She incriminated herself in front of 20 witnesses and multiple cameras. Santiago leaned back. The restaurant's sprinkler system. That was you. Leon answered before Clayton could. The restaurant was scheduled for a fire safety inspection. That's documented. The timing was coincidental. A thin smile crossed Santiago's face. Right. Coincidental. He closed his folder. Mr. King, I'm going to be straight with you. What you did was risky and could be construed as vigilante behavior. But given the evidence we've collected, the forged insurance documents, the communications between Mrs. King and Mr. Briggs, the syringe itself, we have enough to charge them both with conspiracy to commit murder. What was in the syringe? Clayton asked, still waiting on the lab, but preliminary tests suggest a concentrated dose of paralytic agents mixed with something to trigger anaphylaxis. Given your shellfish allergy, if you'd ingested it, you'd have died within minutes. It would have looked like an allergic reaction, maybe blamed on cross-contamination in the kitchen. Clayton felt a cold fury settle in his chest. They'd planned his death in such detail, down to the method that would seem most plausible. Where's Sergio now? He asked. Interview room 2. Not talking, lawyer present. But we found the ID he used to access the kitchen, and the restaurant's cameras caught him preparing the syringe. He's done. And Melinda? Santiago's expression hardened. She's trying to claim she was a victim, that Sergio manipulated her. Says she didn't know about the murder plan, that she thought they were just having an affair. Clayton laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. She forged my signature on insurance documents. She asked detailed questions about my EpiPen protocols. She suggested this specific restaurant and maneuvered me toward ordering the shellfish special. We know. Her lawyer's already trying to negotiate a plea deal. Santiago stood. You're free to go, Mr. King. We'll be in touch as the case develops. And for what it's worth, smart play. Unorthodox as hell, but smart. Outside the station, Clayton found Beth waiting with Daisy. His daughter ran to him, and he caught her in a tight hug. You did so well, Pumpkin. So brave. Is Mom going to jail? Daisy asked against his shoulder. Yes, probably for a long time. Good, Daisy said fiercely. She was going to hurt you. Beth met Clayton's eyes over Daisy's head. I dug deeper into Sergio's background. Those 3 previous cases? 2 of the widows have since married him and divorced him within a year, taking significant settlements. It's a pattern. He seduces wives, helps them kill their husbands, they share the insurance money. Then he moves on to the next mark. Melinda would have been next, Clayton said quietly. Almost certainly. Once you were dead and the insurance paid out, he'd have cleaned out her bank accounts and disappeared. Clayton felt an unexpected flicker of something. Not sympathy for Melinda, but sadness for the waste of it all. She'd thrown away their family, plotted his murder, and all for a man who would have betrayed her anyway. What happens now? Daisy asked. Clayton knelt to her level. Now we go home. I make us dinner. We watch a movie. And tomorrow, we start figuring out our new normal. Can Uncle Leon come for dinner? Leon, who just emerged from the station, grinned. Absolutely. I make excellent spaghetti. As they walked to the car, Clayton's phone buzzed. A message from Kirk Morton. Check your email. You want to see this. Chapter 6, The Fortress. The email contained audio files, recordings Kirk had made during his surveillance of Sergio's office. Clayton listened to them at home that night after Daisy had fallen asleep, Leon sitting beside him with increasing horror on his face. Sergio's voice, cocky and self-assured. Melinda's perfect for this. Greedy, vain, and just smart enough to think she's the one playing me. The husband's a tech geek, head always in his computers. Won't see it coming. Another voice, unfamiliar. What about the kid? Tragic accident after the father's death. Couple months later, maybe a year. Then Melinda is devastated, vulnerable, and I'm the supportive boyfriend who helps her through it all. We get married. I'm named guardian of the estate. Clayton paused the recording, his hands shaking. They plan to kill Daisy too. Jesus Christ, Leon whispered. Clay, this is evidence. Forward it to Beth and Santiago immediately. Clayton's voice was ice. I want these monsters buried so deep they never see daylight again. Over the next week, the case against Sergio Briggs and Melinda King expanded exponentially. The audio recordings revealed a conspiracy that went beyond simple murder for hire. Beth's investigation uncovered forged documents placing Sergio as a beneficiary on accounts Melinda controlled, communication with a medical professional who'd provided the paralytic agents, a pattern of similar schemes dating back 12 years. Evidence that Sergio had already begun courting his next target, a wealthy widow in Westlake Hills. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Roxanne Dawson, personally took over the prosecution. She visited Clayton at his home on Tuesday evening, her expression grim but determined. Mr. King, I want to be honest with you. This case is going to trial. Neither defendant is accepting a plea deal that satisfies the charges we're bringing. Clayton had expected this. What are you charging them with? Conspiracy to commit capital murder. You and potentially your daughter. Insurance fraud, forgery, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud. Sergio's facing additional charges related to his previous schemes. Timeline. Trial likely won't start for 8 to 10 months. Discovery, motions, delays. In the meantime, both defendants are being held without bail. Sergio's a flight risk with resources, and Melinda's facing capital charges. What do you need from me? Roxanne pulled out a folder. Your testimony, obviously, but I also need to prepare you for what's coming. Sergio's lawyer is already trying to paint you as a manipulative husband who drove his wife to desperation. They'll attack your character, your military service, your parenting. Let them try. Melinda's lawyer is taking a different angle. Battered woman syndrome, coercive control by Sergio. She's claiming she was terrified of him, that he threatened to hurt Daisy if she didn't cooperate. Clayton's jaw tightened. That's a lie. The recordings prove. I know, but juries are unpredictable, especially with an attractive woman crying on the stand. Roxanne's eyes were sympathetic but realistic. I'm building the strongest case possible, but you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. The ugliness started sooner than expected. 2 weeks after the arrests, Clayton's home security system alerted him to someone at the front door at 2 a.m. The camera showed a man in dark clothes, face obscured, spray painting something on his door. Clayton called 911, then watched through the camera feed as the vandal finished his message and fled. By the time police arrived, the man was gone, but his work remained in red paint. Murderer. You'll pay. Sergio has friends, Beth said the next morning, examining the footage. Street contacts, some of them violent. This is intimidation. It won't work, Clayton said flatly. I'm putting a patrol car on your street. And Clay, consider keeping Daisy with me and Marcus for a while. Just until trial. Clayton hated the idea of being separated from his daughter, but Beth was right. He called Daisy down to the kitchen and explained the situation gently. Some bad people who are friends with the man who tried to hurt me might try to scare us, he said. But you're going to have a sleepover at Aunt Beth's house for a few weeks. Her and Uncle Marcus will take you to school, and I'll see you every day after work. Daisy looked at the painted door, visible through the window. They wrote a bad word about you. They did, because they're scared that I'm going to make sure Sergio goes to prison for a very long time. Are you? Absolutely. Daisy hugged him. Then I'll stay with Aunt Beth. But you have to text me every morning and night. Deal. The intimidation attempts continued. Someone slashed Clayton's tires. His work email was hacked, with threats sent to his colleagues. A brick through his living room window with a note, "Drop the charges or else." Clayton documented everything, forwarded it all to Roxanne and Beth, and refused to be moved. He installed additional security, varied his routines, and carried a licensed firearm. But mostly he worked. His job at the cybersecurity firm had been understanding, giving him flexible hours during the investigation. Now he threw himself into a major contract, securing a financial institution's network against sophisticated threats. The work was complex, demanding, and kept his mind occupied. At night, he reviewed the case files Roxanne shared with him. He memorized timelines, evidence chains, potential defense arguments. He prepared himself to testify with the same precision he'd applied to planning the trap at Olivia's. Leon visited often, sometimes with legal updates, sometimes just as a friend. "You're handling this better than most would," Leon observed one evening over bourbon. "I learned a long time ago that emotion clouds judgment," Clayton said. "My stepfather taught me that, what not to do. He was all rage and impulse. I swore I'd never be like him." "Your mom, she passed when you were 14, right?" Clayton nodded. "Cancer. Quick and brutal. My stepfather blamed Beth and me. Said we stressed her into getting sick. After she died, he got worse. Started drinking, started hitting. That's when you gathered evidence against him?" "Took 3 months. I documented every bruise on Beth, every missed child support payment he'd gambled away, every time he drove drunk with us in the car. Then I presented it to a family court judge with a list of relatives willing to take us in." Clayton smiled faintly. He didn't see it coming either. "You've been planning strategic victories since you were a kid." "I've been protecting people I love since I was a kid," Clayton corrected. "There's a difference." Leon raised his glass. "To protecting the people we love, and to making sure the bad guys lose." They drank to that. Chapter 7. The Trial, Part 1. 8 months later, Clayton sat in a courtroom wearing a charcoal suit, watching as jury selection concluded. 12 people who would decide whether Sergio Briggs and Melinda King would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Roxanne Dawson had warned him that the trial would take weeks, potentially months. The evidence was extensive, the charges serious, and both defendants had hired expensive legal teams determined to create reasonable doubt. Daisy was back living with him now, the threats having subsided once Sergio's friends realized Clayton wouldn't be intimidated. She sat in the gallery with Beth, holding her aunt's hand, wearing a navy dress and a serious expression far too old for a 9-year-old. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. Roxanne laid out the conspiracy in brutal detail: the affair, the insurance fraud, the murder plot, the intended second murder of a child. She played audio recordings, displayed forged documents on screens, and walked the jury through Sergio's pattern of similar crimes. "This wasn't passion," Roxanne told the jury. "This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was premeditated, calculated murder for profit by 2 individuals who saw Clayton King not as a husband and father, but as a payday. And when he had the audacity to survive their plot, they want you to believe he's the villain of this story." Sergio's lawyer, a slick Dallas attorney named William Lester, countered with a tale of a controlling husband who'd manipulated events to frame his innocent wife and her lover. "Clayton King is a former military intelligence officer," Lester said, "a man trained in deception, surveillance, and psychological operations. He admits to spending months planning an elaborate scheme to entrap these defendants. He used his own daughter as a pawn in his game. Ask yourselves, who's really the master manipulator here?" Melinda's lawyer, a woman named Trina Stark, went for sympathy. "Melinda King is a victim," Stark proclaimed. "A woman trapped in a marriage with a man so cold, so calculating, that he turned her moment of weakness, a mistake, an affair, into a weapon to destroy her life. Yes, she was unfaithful, but infidelity is not murder, and the evidence will show that she was being coerced, threatened, and controlled by Sergio Briggs, a predator who targeted vulnerable women. The first week of testimony focused on the evidence, forensic analysis of the syringe, insurance documents, phone records. Clayton watched from the gallery as expert after expert confirmed what he already knew. The case against the defendants was airtight. The second week brought witnesses. The restaurant staff who'd seen Sergio in the kitchen. Kirk Morton, who testified about his surveillance and the evidence he gathered. Financial experts who walked through the insurance fraud. And then, on Monday of the third week, Clayton took the stand. Roxanne's direct examination was methodical. She walked him through his background, his marriage, his discovery of the affair, his decision to investigate rather than confront. Why didn't you go to police immediately when you suspected your life was in danger? Roxanne asked. Because suspicion isn't evidence, Clayton said clearly. I'd researched Sergio Briggs. I knew he'd evaded prosecution before. I wanted to ensure that when charges were filed, they would result in conviction. And I wanted to protect my daughter from being placed in the custody of a woman planning my murder. Did you love your wife? I thought I did. Looking back, I'm not sure what we had was love, at least not by the end. Why set up the brunch scenario? I needed the attempt documented. I needed witnesses. I needed evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. Clayton met the jury's eyes. I also needed to ensure Daisy was safe before anything happened. The text message protocol ensured she was out of danger before the situation escalated. Were you ever in actual danger that day? Yes. The syringe contained a lethal dose designed to trigger fatal anaphylaxis. If I consumed the contaminated food, I would have died. Roxanne let that hang in the air before continuing. You've heard the defense suggest you're a manipulator, that you orchestrated this to frame the defendants. What do you say to that? I say the evidence speaks for itself. I didn't forge insurance documents. I didn't conduct an affair. I didn't plan a murder. I defended myself and my daughter against two people who saw us as obstacles to money they didn't earn. The cross-examination was brutal. William Lester spent hours trying to paint Clayton as controlling, aggressive, paranoid. He questioned Clayton's military service, suggesting PTSD made him unstable. He attacked Clayton's relationship with Daisy, implying he'd psychologically damaged her by involving her in the brunch scenario. Clayton remained calm, answering each question with precision, refusing to be baited into anger. Trina Stark took a different approach, focusing on the marriage. Mr. King, you testified that you're not sure you ever truly loved your wife. Isn't it true that you were emotionally distant, absent, more interested in your work than your family? I worked to provide for my family. I attended every school event for Daisy, coached her soccer team, and was home for dinner 5 nights a week. But emotionally, were you present emotionally? I was present until I discovered my wife was planning to kill me. After that, yes, I became guarded. Isn't it possible that your emotional unavailability drove Melinda to seek connection elsewhere? My emotional state doesn't justify murder, Ms. Stark. The gallery murmured. The judge called for order. When Clayton finally stepped down after 2 days of testimony, he was exhausted but satisfied. He'd held his ground, presented the facts, and shown the jury exactly who he was, a father protecting his child, a man defending his life. Chapter 8, The Trial, Part 2. The defense's case began in the 4th week. Sergio Briggs took the stand in his own defense, a risky move that his lawyer clearly opposed based on the tense body language between them. Sergio was smooth, charismatic, playing the role of a man wrongly accused. He claimed his relationship with Melinda was purely romantic, that he knew nothing about insurance policies or murder plots, that the kitchen incident was a setup by Clayton to frame him. I admit I was in the kitchen that day, Sergio said, but only because Melinda called me, frantic, saying her husband was acting strange and she was scared. She asked me to be nearby. When I arrived, restaurant staff confronted me. The syringe they claimed to have found, I never touched it. Roxanne's cross-examination shredded this narrative. Mr. Briggs, you testified you were in the kitchen because Mrs. King called you, afraid of her husband. But phone records show no such call. Why would you lie about that? I must be misremembering. Maybe it was a text. There were no texts that morning either. So you lied under oath just now. I'm confused about the timeline. Let's talk about your previous employment with the Austin Police Department. You were fired for evidence tampering, correct? That was never proven. You signed a resignation agreement that explicitly cited evidence tampering. Yes or no, Mr. Briggs? Sergio's composure cracked. Yes, but... And you've been investigated in connection with 3 suspicious deaths of wealthy men whose widows you had relationships with. Correct. I was never charged because there wasn't enough evidence. Until now. Roxanne pulled up the audio recordings. Let's listen to your own words, Mr. Briggs, explaining how you targeted Melinda King, how you planned to murder her husband, and how you intended to eventually kill her daughter. The courtroom listened in horrified silence as Sergio's voice laid out the conspiracy in chilling detail. When the recording ended, several jurors were staring at Sergio with undisguised revulsion. That recording is doctored, Sergio sputtered. That's not. I never. We have the original recording authenticated by 3 independent forensic audio experts. It's your voice, Mr. Briggs. Your plan. Your conspiracy. Sergio left the stand looking rattled and exposed. Melinda's testimony was different. She took the stand wearing a conservative dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look younger, more vulnerable. She cried as she described her marriage to Clayton, painting him as cold and distant. I felt invisible, Melinda said, dabbing at her eyes. Clayton was always working, always on his computers. We barely spoke. I was lonely, and Sergio. He paid attention to me. He made me feel valued. When did you learn about the insurance policies? Trina Stark asked gently. When the police showed them to me after my arrest. I never forged Clayton's signature. Sergio must have done it. He had access to my home office. Did you know about any plan to harm your husband? Never. God, never. I would never hurt Clayton, no matter how unhappy I was. And I would never let anyone hurt Daisy. She's my baby. What happened at the brunch? Melinda's tears flowed harder. Clayton and Daisy both got these strange texts and just left. I was confused, scared. Then I saw the syringe on his plate, and I screamed because I thought someone was trying to hurt him. I thought I was protecting him. It was a good performance. Clayton could see some jurors softening toward her. But Roxanne was ready. Mrs. King, you testified you never knew about the insurance policies. But you spoke to the insurance agent 3 times about the policies, didn't you? Sergio asked me to call. The agent's notes indicate you asked specific questions about the payout timeline, the contestability period, and the double indemnity clause for accidental death. Why would you ask those questions if you didn't know about a murder plot? Sergio told me to ask. You also researched paralytic agents on your home computer. What? I don't remember doing that. Your browser history shows 17 searches related to undetectable poisons, allergic reactions, and how long anaphylaxis takes to kill. Were you researching these topics for book club? Melinda had no answer. The tears kept flowing, but now they looked like desperation rather than grief. You suggested the brunch location. You guided your husband toward ordering the shellfish special. You asked detailed questions about his EpiPen in the weeks before. These aren't the actions of an innocent woman being manipulated. These are the actions of a conspirator. I was terrified of Sergio. He threatened Daisy. Yet you never went to police. Never told your husband. Never warned anyone. Roxanne's voice was steel. Instead, you forged insurance documents, researched murder methods, and actively participated in a plan to kill the father of your child. That's not fear, Mrs. King. That's greed. When Melinda left the stand, the sympathy she generated had largely evaporated. Closing arguments came in week 6. Roxanne was brilliant, weaving together evidence, testimony, and the defendant's own words into an irrefutable narrative of conspiracy and attempted murder. The defense wants you to believe that Clayton King is the villain, a manipulative man who framed 2 innocent people, Roxanne told the jury. But the evidence shows otherwise. The evidence shows 2 people who planned a murder in meticulous detail, who forged documents, who researched methods, who acted on their plan. The evidence shows that Clayton King did what any rational person would do when they discovered people plotting to kill them. He protected himself and his child, and he gathered proof. William Lester and Trina Stark did their best, but their closing arguments felt hollow against the weight of evidence. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Chapter 9. Justice and New Beginnings. Clayton sat in the courtroom gallery, Daisy beside him holding his hand, as the jury filed back in. Their faces were serious, unreadable. The forewoman, a middle-aged teacher from Round Rock, held a folded paper. As the jury reached a verdict, the judge asked, "We have, Your Honor." Clayton's heart pounded. Beside him, Daisy squeezed his hand tighter. Beth sat on his other side, Leon behind them. In the rows across the aisle, he could see some of Melinda's family, her mother, her sister, their faces drawn and anxious. In the case of the state of Texas versus Sergio Briggs, on the charge of conspiracy to commit capital murder, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge gavelled for silence. The forewoman continued through the charges. Attempted murder, guilty. Insurance fraud, guilty. Forgery, guilty. Each verdict another nail in Sergio's coffin. The man sat stone-faced, but Clayton could see the tension in his jaw, the white knuckles gripping the table. Then came Melinda's verdicts. Conspiracy to commit capital murder, guilty. Attempted murder, guilty. Insurance fraud, guilty. Melinda sobbed as each guilty verdict was read. Her lawyer put an arm around her shoulders, but there was nothing to be done. The evidence had been overwhelming. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. On sentencing day, Clayton gave a victim impact statement. "Your Honor, Sergio Briggs and Melinda King didn't just try to kill me. They planned to kill my daughter. They saw a 9-year-old child as an obstacle to be eliminated." Clayton's voice was steady, but his anger was palpable. "They didn't succeed because I refused to be a victim. I fought back with intelligence, preparation, and the law. And I'm standing here today asking you to ensure they never have the opportunity to harm another family." Daisy also gave a statement, short and devastating in its simplicity. "My mom was supposed to protect me. Instead, she wanted to hurt my dad and me for money. I don't have a mom anymore, but I still have my dad, and that's because he was smarter and braver than the bad people." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Rosemary Sanford, delivered the sentences without hesitation. "Sergio Briggs, you have shown yourself to be a predator of the worst kind. Someone who targets vulnerable families, manipulates relationships, and orchestrates murder for profit. The court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the capital murder conspiracy charge, with consecutive sentences on the remaining charges." Sergio showed no reaction, but his lawyer's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Melinda King, you betrayed the most fundamental obligations of marriage and motherhood. You chose greed over love, money over your child's life. The court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with consecutive sentences on the remaining charges." Melinda collapsed in her chair, wailing. Her family left the courtroom in tears. Clayton felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a bone-deep weariness and relief that it was finally over. 3 months later, Clayton and Daisy moved into a new house in a quiet neighborhood in Westlake Hills. Smaller than the old place, but it was theirs. No memories of Melinda, no ghosts of betrayal. The golden retriever puppy they'd adopted, named Scout, bounded around the backyard as Clayton and Daisy unpacked boxes on a warm December afternoon. "Dad, where should we put the photo albums?" Daisy asked, holding a box. "The ones with Mom in them?" She nodded. Clayton knelt beside her. "We put them in storage. Not thrown away. She's still your mother, and someday you might want to look at the good memories. But we don't need to see them every day." "I don't have good memories of her anymore," Daisy said quietly. "You will again, maybe, or maybe not. Either is okay. What she did doesn't erase that she gave birth to you, and for that I'll always have some gratitude. But it also doesn't excuse what she did." Daisy processed this. "Uncle Leon's coming for Christmas, right?" "Yep. And Aunt Beth and Uncle Marcus. And Kirk Morton said he might stop by with his kids." "Good. I like our new family better anyway." Clayton pulled her into a hug. "Me too, Pumpkin. Me too." That evening, after Daisy was asleep, Clayton sat on the back porch with a bourbon and his laptop. He'd received an email from Roxanne Dawson earlier that day. Clayton, thought you'd want to know. Based on evidence from the Briggs case, we've reopened investigations into those 3 previous suspicious deaths. 2 of the widows have agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. Looks like Sergio's going down for those murders too. You helped us catch a serial killer. Thank you. Clayton stared at the email for a long time. 3 men who might get justice. 3 families who might get closure. All because he'd refused to be a victim, because he'd fought back with intelligence and preparation. His phone buzzed. A text from Beth. Proud of you, little brother. Mom will be too. Another from Leon. Poker night next week? You, me, Kirk, and my buddy Santiago from the DA's office. You in? Clayton smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I'll bring the bourbon. He looked up at the stars, Scout snoring at his feet, and thought about the journey from that awful discovery 6 months ago to this moment of peace. It hadn't been easy. There'd been fear, anger, exhaustion, and more than a few sleepless nights. But he'd won, not through violence or revenge, but through patience, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the people he loved. Somewhere in a Texas prison, Sergio Briggs and Melinda King were learning that some people don't crumble when you try to destroy them. Some people fight back smarter, harder, and with the full weight of the law behind them. Clayton King was one of those people, and he taught his daughter to be one too. He raised his glass to the night sky, a silent toast to survival, to justice, and to the new beginning he and Daisy were building together. Scout stirred, looked up at Clayton with adoring eyes, then went back to sleep. Peace. Finally peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Alexander Beck adjusted his tie as he walked through the marble lobby of Meridian Capital, the investment firm he'd built from nothing over the past 15 years. At 43, he commanded respect in every boardroom from Manhattan to Los Angeles, his reputation for orchestrating complex mergers preceding him like a force of nature. What most people didn't know was that his expertise in corporate warfare came from an earlier education in actual warfare. 8 years in Army intelligence had taught him to read people, anticipate their moves, and strike when they least expected it. The Hartley-Davidson merger had taken 3 months to finalize, requiring delicate negotiations between 2 pharmaceutical giants whose mutual hatred ran deeper than their desire for profit. Alexander had spent the last 72 hours in Chicago, managing egos and maneuvering around obstacles that would have destroyed lesser dealmakers. Now, finally it was done. For $1 billion in combined assets, 2,000 jobs saved, and a commission that would secure his family's future for generations. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Victoria. Working late again. Don't wait up. V. Alexander frowned at the message's coldness. Victoria Tate Beck had always been direct, but lately her communications felt almost clinical. They'd been married 12 years, and he could chart the slow erosion of warmth in her messages like tracking a stock's decline. Where once she'd signed texts with hearts or playful jokes, now she offered only initials and business-like efficiency. Dr. Richard Stevens, Alexander's old friend from college and now the family physician, had mentioned during their last golf game that Victoria seemed different during Jake's recent checkup. When pressed for details, Richard had grown evasive, changing the subject with the kind of practiced deflection that suggested professional concern. Alexander's driver, Miguel McConnell, pulled up to the curb in the black Mercedes. Miguel had been with the family for 5 years, a former Marine who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before transitioning to civilian security work. His loyalty was absolute, his discretion complete, and his observations rarely wrong. "How was Chicago, Mr. Beck?" Miguel asked as they pulled into traffic. "Successful. Any unusual activity at the house while I was gone?" Miguel's eyes met Alexander's in the rearview mirror. Mrs. Beck had visitors. Same pattern as last month. Late evenings, cars with tinted windows, meetings in the home office that lasted past midnight. Alexander had noticed the pattern too. Victoria's consulting business had always involved irregular hours, but recently her clients seemed to prefer conducting business in their home rather than her downtown office. When Alexander had asked about it, Victoria had explained that her new contracts involved sensitive corporate restructuring that required additional privacy. The boy, Alexander asked, quiet lately, spends most of his time in his room when he's home from school. Seems to avoid Mrs. Beck when possible. Jake Beck was 11 years old, bright and curious despite his recent withdrawal. Alexander had attributed his son's introversion to typical preteen adjustment issues, but Miguel's observation suggested something more troubling. Children didn't avoid their mothers without reason. The Beck residence sat on 2 acres in Richmond's most exclusive neighborhood, a colonial mansion that Victoria had insisted they purchase despite Alexander's preference for something more modest. The house was beautiful but cold, with too many rooms and too few warm memories. As they pulled through the electronic gates, Alexander noticed that Victoria's BMW was in the garage, contradicting her text about working late. "Wait here," Alexander told Miguel. "I'll call if I need anything." The house felt eerily quiet as Alexander entered through the front door. Victoria's voice drifted from the living room, speaking in the low, controlled tones she used for business calls. Alexander moved silently through the foyer, his intelligence, training, making noise, discipline instinctive. "Told you the timeline is firm. No extensions, no excuses. The client pays for results, not explanations." Victoria's voice carried an edge Alexander rarely heard. "If you can't deliver, I'll find someone who can." Alexander paused at the doorway, studying his wife through the gap. Victoria sat in her favorite armchair, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, her posture rigid with authority. At 38, she remained strikingly beautiful, but there was something predatory in her expression that Alexander didn't recognize. "Handle it, Grant. That's what I pay you for." She ended the call and looked up, startling slightly when she saw Alexander. "You're back early." Her smile was practiced, professional. "How did the merger go?" "Successfully closed." "Who was that on the phone?" "Grant Warren, my new business partner. We're handling some complex restructuring cases that require specialized approaches." Grant Warren. Alexander made a mental note to research the name. Victoria had never mentioned a business partner before, and her hesitation over specialized approaches suggested activities that wouldn't bear scrutiny. "Where's Jake?" "Upstairs doing homework. He's been having some behavioral issues lately. Nothing serious, just testing boundaries." Alexander nodded, but something in Victoria's tone raised flags. Behavioral issues weren't typical for Jake, who'd always been a well-adjusted child despite his parents' demanding careers. "I should check on him." "He's fine, Alexander. You worry too much." But Alexander was already climbing the stairs, his instincts telling him that something was wrong. Jake's bedroom door was closed, which was unusual. The boy typically left it open unless he was sleeping. Alexander knocked softly. "Jake, it's Dad. Come in." Alexander opened the door to find his son sitting at his desk, homework spread before him, but his attention focused on something outside his window. Jake looked up with eyes that held too much caution for an 11-year-old. "Hey, buddy. How was school?" "Fine." Jake's response was automatic, rehearsed. Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, studying his son's body language. The boy was tense, watchful, as if expecting trouble. "Everything okay at home while I was gone?" Jake's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to his father. "Mom's been different lately. She has meetings downstairs, and she says I'm not allowed to leave my room when they're happening." "What kind of meetings?" "I don't know, but sometimes there are kids there. Kids I don't recognize. And they look—" Jake struggled for words. "They look scared, Dad." Alexander felt ice form in his veins. "Scared how?" "Like when Tommy Martinez got lost in the woods last year. Remember? He had that look like he didn't know what was going to happen to him." Alexander remembered. Tommy had been missing for 6 hours before search teams found him, and the experience had left the boy traumatized for weeks. The comparison was deeply troubling. "Jake, has your mother ever—" hurt you, or made you do things you didn't want to do? Jake's silence was answer enough. Alexander felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice gentle. You can tell me anything, son. I promise you're safe. She says consequences are a part of her business, Jake whispered. She says I need to learn about consequences if I want to be part of this family. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. Whatever Victoria was involved in, it was affecting their son directly. And the mention of other children suggested something far worse than business consulting. Jake, I want you to pack a bag. Just essentials, clothes for a few days, your tablet, whatever you need. Are we going somewhere? Maybe. I need to understand what's been happening here while I was away. As Alexander helped his son pack, he was already planning his next moves. His intelligence background had taught him to gather information systematically, to understand all variables before taking action. But his parental instincts were screaming that Jake was in immediate danger. Victoria Tate Beck had built a facade of respectability around something dark and twisted. Grant Warren was part of it, whatever it was. And somehow, children were involved, children who looked scared, according to Jake. Alexander had spent 15 years in corporate warfare, but this felt like the beginning of something far more personal and infinitely more dangerous. His wife wasn't just hiding business activities, she was hiding crimes. And she'd made the fatal mistake of involving their son. In intelligence work, the most dangerous enemies were those who looked like allies. Alexander was beginning to understand that he'd been living with the enemy for 12 years, and she'd been using their home as a base of operations. That was about to change. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Alexander waited until Victoria's BMW left the driveway the next morning before beginning his investigation. Jake was at school, Miguel was running errands, and Alexander had the house to himself for the first time in months. He started with Victoria's home office, a converted bedroom on the second floor that she kept locked when not in use. The lock was expensive, but not military grade. Alexander had it open in under 2 minutes using techniques learned in intelligence training. Victoria's office was meticulously organized, files arranged alphabetically, computer password protected, a safe built into the wall behind her desk. The computer proved more challenging. Victoria had implemented sophisticated security measures that suggested she was protecting more than client confidentiality. Alexander bypassed the login screen using a USB drive loaded with extraction software, a gift from his former colleagues in intelligence who transitioned to private sector work. What he found made his blood run cold. Financial records showed payments from offshore accounts totaling over $2 million in the past 18 months. The money came from shell companies registered in countries known for lax banking oversight. Most disturbing were the payment descriptions: procurement services, transportation coordination, inventory management. The terminology suggested human trafficking. Alexander photographed everything, uploading files to an encrypted cloud account. Victoria's email history revealed communications with Grant Warren that confirmed his worst fears. Children were being bought, sold, and transported through a network that Victoria helped coordinate. The behavioral issues she'd mentioned about Jake weren't discipline problems. They were preparation for something unspeakable. A folder labeled Local Inventory contained photographs that made Alexander's vision blur with rage. Dozens of children, ages 8 to 14, photographed in sterile environments with identification numbers. Jake wasn't among them, but Alexander recognized several faces from missing persons reports he'd seen on the news. The safe behind Victoria's desk contained passports, cash, and a handgun. But more importantly, it held contracts and shipping manifests that revealed the scope of the operation. Victoria wasn't just a participant. She was a regional coordinator for what appeared to be an international trafficking network. Alexander was photographing the shipping manifests when he heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, he saw Victoria's BMW returning unexpectedly. He had 30 seconds to secure the office and get downstairs before she entered the house. He closed the safe, relocked the office door, and was in the kitchen making coffee when Victoria walked through the front door. "Forgot some files," she called out, her footsteps heading directly upstairs. Alexander waited, listening for signs that she'd detected his intrusion. The office door opened and closed. Drawers slid open. A minute later, Victoria came downstairs carrying a briefcase. "Busy day?" Alexander asked, keeping his voice casual. "Client emergency. I might be late tonight." She paused at the door, studying his face. "You look tired. Everything okay? Just jet lag. I'll probably turn in early." After Victoria left, Alexander called Miguel and arranged for Jake to stay with Alexander's sister in Baltimore for the weekend. He told Jake it was a surprise visit, but the boy seemed relieved to be leaving the house. That evening, Alexander contacted Dr. Richard Stevens. "Richard, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to ask no questions." "That sounds ominous. Come to my house tomorrow, around 7 p.m. Victoria will be out, but I want you to examine Jake when he gets back from Baltimore. Look for signs of abuse, physical, psychological, anything that suggests he's been harmed." "Alexander, what's going on?" "I can't explain yet, but I think Jake is in danger, and I need medical documentation of his condition before I take action." "What kind of action?" "The kind that ends threats permanently." Richard was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there." The next day, Alexander used his business connections to research Grant Warren's background. What he found was a pattern of association with organized crime figures, missing persons cases, and unexplained wealth. Warren had been arrested twice for human trafficking, but never convicted. His charges mysteriously dropped due to insufficient evidence and procedural errors. More disturbing was Warren's connection to a network of wealthy clients who paid premium prices for specialized services involving children. The network operated internationally, using legitimate businesses as fronts for trafficking operations. Victoria's consulting firm was one of those fronts. Alexander was studying financial records when Miguel called with an update. "Mr. Beck, Mrs. Beck just left the house with several suitcases. She told me she'd be away on business for the next few days." "Did she say where?" "Chicago." "But, sir, I followed her to the airport. She didn't board a commercial flight. Private jet, no flight plan filed." Victoria was running, which meant she'd either detected Alexander's investigation or received warning from someone in her network. Either way, Alexander's window for gathering evidence was closing. He called Richard Stevens and asked him to come immediately rather than waiting for evening. "Bring your medical bag and be prepared to document everything you see. This might be the only chance we get." Richard arrived 30 minutes later, his expression grim. "Alexander, I need to tell you something before we continue. I've been concerned about Jake for months. During his last checkup, I noticed signs of psychological trauma, hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, anxiety responses to certain questions." "What kind of questions?" "Questions about his home life, about his relationship with his mother. When I asked if he felt safe at home, he shut down completely." Alexander felt the last pieces of restraint crumble. "What else?" "Physical signs that suggested stress-induced illness. Stomach problems, headaches, changes in appetite. Classic symptoms of a child living in fear." "But you didn't report it." "I had no proof of abuse, and Victoria convinced me it was related to school stress and your travel schedule. I should have trusted my instincts." Alexander led Richard upstairs to Jake's room, pointing out details he'd noticed during his investigation. A lock on the inside of Jake's door that was clearly installed recently, blackout curtains that blocked outside view, and a small camera hidden in the ceiling light fixture. "She was monitoring him," Alexander said, "keeping him isolated and under surveillance." Richard examined the camera with growing horror. "This isn't parental concern. This is containment." They were discussing the implications when Alexander's phone rang. Jake's school was calling. "Mr. Beck? This is Principal Chapman. I'm afraid there's been an incident involving Jake." "What kind of incident?" "He collapsed during lunch. He's conscious now, but he seems disoriented and frightened. We've called an ambulance." Alexander felt the world shift around him. "We'll meet you at the hospital." As they drove to the hospital, Richard made an observation that would prove prophetic. "Alexander, if Victoria is involved in trafficking, and if she was preparing Jake for that network, his collapse might not be medical. It might be a response to whatever they've been doing to condition him." "What do you mean?" "Psychological breaking, physical conditioning, drug administration." Children in trafficking situations are often subjected to systematic abuse designed to make them compliant. Alexander's vision went red. How long would that process take? Months, maybe longer, depending on the child's resistance. Which meant Victoria had been abusing their son systematically while Alexander was traveling for business, believing his family was safe at home. The hospital came into view, and Alexander made a silent promise. By the time this was over, Victoria Tate Beck and Grant Warren would wish they'd never heard the name Jake Beck. But first, he needed to make sure his son survived whatever they'd done to him. Chapter 3. The Unveiling. Alexander burst through the emergency room doors with Dr. Stevens close behind, his heart hammering against his ribs. A nurse directed them to Room 7, where Jake lay on a hospital bed, looking small and fragile against the white sheets. His face was pale, and his eyes held a glassy quality that Alexander recognized from his intelligence days. The look of someone who'd been chemically sedated. "Dad!" Jake's voice was weak, confused. "I'm here, buddy. You're safe now." Dr. Emily Woodward, the attending physician, approached with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Mr. Beck? I'm Dr. Woodward. Jake is stable, but I need to discuss his condition with you privately." Alexander squeezed his son's hand. "Dr. Stevens will stay with Jake. He's our family physician." In the hallway, Dr. Woodward's expression was grave. "Mr. Beck, Jake's blood work shows traces of several substances that are extremely concerning. Benzodiazepines, mild hallucinogens, and what appears to be a custom pharmaceutical cocktail designed to induce compliance and suppress resistance." "Are you saying he was drugged?" "I'm saying he was systematically poisoned over an extended period. The levels suggest regular administration, probably disguised in food or drinks. These substances are commonly used in—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "In situations where someone wants to control another person's behavior and mental state." Alexander felt rage building in his chest like a nuclear reaction. "How long?" "Based on the blood chemistry, I'd estimate several months of regular exposure." "Mr. Beck, I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and law enforcement." "Do it. I want everything documented." When they returned to Jake's room, Dr. Stevens was conducting his own examination while Jake dozed fitfully. Stevens' face was tight with controlled fury. "Alexander, we need to talk. Now." They stepped into the hallway where Stevens spoke in low, urgent tones. "The drug cocktail isn't random. It's a specific combination used by trafficking networks to condition children for transport and for client use. Jake shows signs of systematic psychological conditioning, responses to verbal cues, physical reactions to certain stimuli. Someone has been preparing your son for something unspeakable." Alexander's world tilted. "How do you know about trafficking methods?" "I volunteer with an organization that helps trafficking survivors. I've seen these patterns before." Stevens grabbed Alexander's arm, his voice trembling. "Sir, you need to call the cops before your wife, before she completes whatever process she started." The words hit Alexander like physical blows. His wife, the woman he'd shared a bed with for 12 years, had been systematically abusing their son in preparation for selling him to sexual predators. "There's more," Stevens continued. "Jake mentioned something while you were talking to Dr. Woodward. He said his mother told him they were going on a special trip this weekend, a trip where he'd meet important people who would decide his future." Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Change of plans. Pick up Jake from school early. We're taking a family trip. Don't disappoint me." The message carried an implicit threat. Victoria knew he was investigating her, and she was moving to secure her asset, their son, before Alexander could interfere. "She's coming for him," Alexander said. "Not if I can help it." Stevens was already moving toward the nurse's station. "I'm placing Jake under medical hold. He's too unstable to be discharged. That won't stop her if she's determined. Then we make sure she can't find him." Alexander called Miguel while Stevens spoke to hospital security. Within minutes, Alexander had arranged for Jake to be transferred to a private facility where Victoria couldn't access him. But as they prepared for the transfer, Alexander's phone rang. "Alexander Beck." The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a slight accent. "Who is this?" "A friend of your wife's." She asked me to deliver a message. What message? She has something you want. You have something she needs. Perhaps we can arrange an exchange. Alexander felt ice form in his veins. What kind of exchange? Your son is safe for now, but that could change quickly. Victoria is prepared to be reasonable if you're prepared to be cooperative. Victoria doesn't have my son. He's right here with me. A pause. Check your messages, Mr. Beck. Alexander's phone chimed with an incoming text containing a photograph. The image showed Jake's bedroom at home, but it wasn't empty. A child was lying on the bed. A child who looked exactly like Jake from a distance, but wasn't him upon closer inspection. Body double, the voice continued. Purchased from our specialty catalog. Your wife wanted to ensure a smooth transition when she collected the real asset. Alexander's mind raced. Victoria had been planning Jake's abduction for months, possibly years. The behavioral issues she'd mentioned weren't problems. They were testing to see how far she could push before Alexander became suspicious. What do you want? Very simple. You forget everything you've learned about your wife's business activities. You sign custody papers granting her sole parental rights. You transfer half your assets to accounts she'll specify. In exchange, your son continues to live, just not with you. And if I refuse, then the asset becomes inventory, and you become a liability. Neither outcome would be pleasant for your family. Alexander looked through the window at Jake, still unconscious on a hospital bed, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. His wife hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd been grooming their son for sexual slavery, while Alexander built a fortune to support the family he thought he was protecting. I need time to consider your offer. You have until tomorrow night. Victoria will call with final instructions. Alexander ended the call and turned to Stevens, who'd been listening with growing horror. They're going to kill you both regardless, Stevens said. You realize that, right? You've seen too much, and Jake can identify them. I know. So what are you going to do? Alexander looked at his unconscious son, thinking about the years of business trips while Victoria had unlimited access to systematically abuse Jake. Thinking about the children in those photographs, the offshore accounts, the network of predators who paid premium prices for innocence. I'm going to remind them why Army intelligence officers are trained to win wars, not just battles. Alexander, Dr. Stevens, how many trafficking survivors have you worked with? Dozens. What? How many of their abusers faced real consequences? Stevens was quiet. Very few. The networks are too sophisticated, too well-connected. Most survivors never see justice. That's about to change. Alexander pulled out his phone and began making calls. The first was to his former commanding officer, Colonel Rodney Cooper, now retired and running a private security firm. Rodney? It's Alexander Beck. I need a favor, and I need it off the books. What kind of favor? The kind that involves ending threats to children. Permanently. Within an hour, Alexander had assembled a team of former intelligence operatives and special forces personnel who specialized in what the government couldn't officially handle. Victoria Tate Beck and Grant Warren had built their network using money, fear, and the assumption that their victims would be too powerless to fight back. They were about to learn the difference between being powerful and being dangerous. And Alexander Beck had never been more dangerous in his life. Chapter 4. The Network Exposed. Alexander established his command center in a secure location 40 miles outside Richmond, a decommissioned military facility that Colonel Cooper's security firm used for training exercises. The building's soundproofed rooms and sophisticated surveillance equipment made it perfect for the kind of operation Alexander was planning. His team consisted of 5 specialists. Colonel Cooper himself, an expert in psychological warfare. Phil Bailey, a former NSA analyst who could penetrate any digital security system. Mitch Simon, a demolitions expert with a talent for making problems disappear. Peter Chapman, a master of surveillance and infiltration. And Loren Root, whose expertise in interrogation techniques had made him legendary in intelligence circles. What we're dealing with, Alexander explained to his team, is a trafficking network that's been operating for at least 3 years. My wife, Victoria, coordinates regional operations. Her partner, Grant Warren, handles enforcement and client relations. They have connections to organized crime, political protection, and international networks. Phil Bailey looked up from his laptop, where he'd been analyzing the evidence Alexander had gathered. The financial structure is sophisticated. They're moving money through 17 different shell companies across 9 countries. Conservative estimate puts their operation at $50 million annually. How many children? Cooper asked. Based on the documentation, I found approximately 200 active cases across the Mid-Atlantic region. Ages 8 to 16, both domestic and international acquisitions. The room fell silent. Even seasoned operators had limits to what they could process emotionally. What's the primary objective? Chapman asked. Complete destruction of the network. No survivors, no loose ends, no possibility of reorganization. And secondary objectives? Recovery of the children, evidence preservation for law enforcement, and elimination of political protection. Loren Root studied the photographs Alexander had taken from Victoria's safe. The political connections are extensive. 3 congressmen, a federal judge, 2 state senators, and multiple law enforcement officials. Taking down the network means taking down people with the power to retaliate. Then we make sure they can't retaliate. Alexander's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. Package delivered. Inspection at midnight. Location to follow. The message was accompanied by an address in rural Virginia and instructions for arriving undetected. Victoria was setting up the promised exchange. Jake's life for Alexander's silence and money. It's a trap, Cooper said after reading the message. Of course it is, but it's also an opportunity to get inside their operation. Alexander, they're not planning to honor any agreement. The moment you show up, you're dead. Maybe, but they don't know what I've learned or who I've contacted. They think they're dealing with a desperate father who'll do anything to save his son. Aren't you? Alexander was quiet for a moment. I'm a desperate father, but I'm also someone who spent 8 years learning how to destroy enemies who hide behind walls and money and political connections. Victoria made a critical error in judgment. She assumed I'd react emotionally instead of tactically. Phil Bailey looked up from his computer. I've been monitoring Victoria's communications. She's in contact with a client who's scheduled to inspect the merchandise tonight. The financial transfer for Jake is set at $2 million. Alexander felt rage build in his chest, but his voice remained calm. Then we give them what they're expecting. What do you mean? We let Victoria think she's won. We allow the meeting to proceed. But instead of exchanging Jake for money and silence, we use the gathering to identify everyone in their network. Chapman nodded slowly. Surveillance operation. Let them expose themselves. More than surveillance. Elimination. Alexander outlined his plan. Instead of going to the meeting himself, he would send Mitch Simon disguised as Alexander, wearing body armor and equipped with recording equipment. Meanwhile, Chapman would infiltrate the location hours earlier to establish overwatch positions. Phil Bailey would monitor all electronic communications, and Loren Root would position himself to interrogate any survivors. What about the children who are already in the system? Cooper asked. Simultaneous raids on all known locations. We hit everything at once. Transportation hubs, safe houses, client locations, financial centers. By dawn tomorrow, there won't be enough left of their network to threaten anyone. The team spent the afternoon coordinating with law enforcement contacts who could be trusted. FBI agents Cooper had worked with, local detectives who specialized in child crimes, federal prosecutors who'd been frustrated by political interference in trafficking cases. At 6 p.m., Alexander received another message from Victoria. Cabin on Route 301, mile marker 47. Come alone. Bring signed custody documents and bank transfer confirmations. Jake will be returned unharmed if you comply fully. The location was perfect for what Alexander had planned, isolated, with multiple approach routes and escape paths. Chapman departed immediately to establish surveillance positions, while Phil Bailey began monitoring all cell phone traffic in the area. At 8 p.m., Alexander's phone rang. Victoria's voice was cold, businesslike. Alexander, I trust you prepared everything we discussed. The papers are signed. The money's ready to transfer. Good. I want you to understand something before tonight's meeting. What you've discovered about my business activities, that stays between us. If you ever consider exposing what you've learned, remember that I know people who specialize in making problems disappear. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not just talking about you, Alexander. I'm talking about anyone you might have confided in. Your sister in Baltimore, for example. Dr. Stevens. Even Colonel Cooper. Alexander felt ice form in his veins. Victoria knew about his team, which meant she'd been monitoring his communications or had sources inside law enforcement. How long have you known? Known what? That my husband was a former intelligence officer? I've known since before we were married, Alexander. Did you really think someone like me would choose a partner randomly? The implication hit him like a physical blow. You targeted me. I recruited you. Your background, your resources, your legitimate business activities. All perfect cover for my operations. For 12 years, you've been providing exactly what I needed. Respectability, financial networks, and geographic mobility. And Jake, insurance. A way to ensure your continued cooperation if you ever became problematic. Alexander realized that his marriage, his family, his entire adult life had been an elaborate deception designed to serve Victoria's criminal enterprise. She hadn't just betrayed him, she'd never been anything other than his enemy. See you at midnight, darling. The line went dead, and Alexander sat in silence for several minutes, processing the full scope of Victoria's manipulation. Then he activated his team's communication system. Change of plans. This isn't just about destroying a trafficking network. It's about eliminating a counterintelligence operation that's been running for over a decade. What do you mean? Cooper asked. Victoria didn't just happen to become involved in trafficking. She's been using it as cover for something larger: recruitment, blackmail, political control. We're not just taking down criminals. We're taking down a spy network that's been operating in plain sight. The mission parameters had shifted, but Alexander's resolve remained absolute. Victoria Tate Beck had used their son, their marriage, and their shared life as weapons against innocent children. Tonight, she would learn that some weapons were designed to cut both ways. Chapter 5. The Hunter's Moon. At 11:30 p.m., Alexander's team was in position around the cabin on Route 301. Chapman had established overwatch from a tree line 300 yards east, with clear sight lines to all approaches. Phil Bailey monitored electronic communications from a van parked 2 miles away, tracking every cell phone and radio transmission within a 5-mile radius. Loren Root had positioned himself near the access road, ready to intercept anyone attempting to escape. Mitch Simon, wearing body armor beneath clothes identical to Alexander's, approached the cabin according to the specified timeline. Hidden cameras and recording equipment would capture everything that happened inside, while Cooper coordinated the operation from the command vehicle. Alexander remained at the secure facility with Jake, who was recovering well from the drug treatments but still needed medical supervision. Dr. Stevens had agreed to stay with the boy while Alexander finished what Victoria had started. At 11:47 p.m., Chapman's voice crackled through the communication system. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. For occupants total, looks like Victoria, Grant Warren, and 2 unknown males. Alexander watched through the hidden cameras as Victoria entered the cabin, followed by Warren and 2 men who carried themselves like professional security. Victoria looked confident, predatory, wearing the expression of someone who believed she held all the advantages. Where's Beck? Warren asked, scanning the shadows outside. He'll be here. Alexander's nothing if not punctual. At exactly midnight, Mitch Simon emerged from the tree line, walking toward the cabin with the measured pace of someone trying to control their fear. Through the hidden cameras, Alexander watched Victoria's face light up with satisfaction. Alexander, come in. We have much to discuss. Mitch entered the cabin, and Alexander's recording equipment captured everything that followed. Where's my son? Mitch asked, using Alexander's voice patterns. Safe. For now. Victoria gestured to a laptop on the cabin's table. Real-time video feed from our holding facility. As you can see, Jake is comfortable and well cared for. The screen showed a child lying on a bed in what appeared to be a medical facility. The child looked like Jake from a distance, but Alexander could tell it was the body double Victoria had mentioned. The custody papers? Victoria extended her hand. Mitch handed over documents that Phil Bailey had prepared, legally worthless forgeries that would satisfy Victoria's immediate needs while providing no actual authority. And the financial transfers? Ready to execute on your confirmation that Jake is released safely. Victoria studied the papers, then looked up with cold satisfaction. You've been surprisingly cooperative, Alexander. I expected more resistance. I want my son safe. Nothing else matters. Nothing else should matter. But I know you, Alexander. I know how your mind works. You've spent the last week investigating my business activities, gathering information, probably planning some dramatic confrontation. Mitch remained silent, letting Victoria reveal her hand. The problem is that you don't understand the scope of what you're dealing with. My organization isn't just regional, it's international. The clients aren't just wealthy perverts. They're political leaders, business executives, people with the power to destroy anyone who threatens their interests. Warren stepped forward, producing a tablet that displayed financial records of photographs. Your investigation led you to discover maybe 10% of our operation. The rest goes deeper than you can imagine. Alexander watched through the cameras as Warren revealed the true scope of their network. It wasn't just trafficking. It was a comprehensive blackmail operation targeting political leaders, business executives, and law enforcement officials. The children weren't just victims. They were weapons used to control powerful people through recorded compromises. 17 senators, 43 congressmen, 6 governors, 2 Supreme Court justices, and over 200 corporate executives, Victoria continued. All of them compromised, all of them under our control. That's real power, Alexander, not the corporate merger games you've been playing. What do you want from me? Complete integration into our operation. Your business networks, your financial expertise, your military contacts. In exchange, Jake lives, and you become part of the most powerful shadow organization in the country. And if I refuse? Warren smiled coldly. Then you discover what happened to the other husbands who became problematic. Through the cameras, Alexander watched Victoria produce a file containing photographs of 4 men, all apparently dead from various causes. Car accidents, suicides, medical emergencies. Recruitment sometimes requires permanent solutions to family complications. Alexander felt rage building, but he forced himself to remain analytical. Victoria and Warren were revealing everything, apparently confident that Mitch/Alexander had no choice but to accept their terms. I need guarantees, Mitch said. Protection for my son, legal immunity, financial security. You'll have all of that and more. But first, you need to prove your commitment to our organization. Victoria produced another laptop, this one displaying live video from what appeared to be a warehouse. Alexander's blood turned to ice as he recognized the location. It was one of the addresses from Victoria's shipping manifests, and it contained dozens of children in various stages of processing. Tomorrow night, we have a special event for our most exclusive clients. You're going to coordinate security for the gathering. What kind of gathering? The kind that generates enough compromising material to control a federal judge for the rest of his career. Alexander had heard enough. Through his communication system, he activated the final phase of his operation. All teams execute. Chapman's voice came through immediately. Multiple targets acquired. Beginning elimination sequence. Phil Bailey reported. Electronic communications jammed. No signals getting in or out. Loren route confirmed. Access road secured. No one leaves alive. Alexander's team moved with precision born from years of combat experience. Warren and his security personnel were eliminated before they could draw weapons. Victoria found herself surrounded by operatives who materialized from shadows like death itself. Through the cameras, Alexander watched Victoria's confidence crumble as she realized the scope of her miscalculation. "You're not Alexander Beck," she said to Mitch. "No." Alexander's voice came through hidden speakers. "But I am." Alexander entered the cabin wearing full tactical gear, followed by Cooper and 3 additional operators. Victoria backed against the wall, her composure finally cracking. This is impossible. My contacts, my protection. Your contacts are under federal arrest as we speak. Your protection just learned what happens when they shield child traffickers from military intelligence operations. Phil Bailey's voice crackled through the communication system. Primary target location secure. 47 children recovered alive. Network infrastructure completely destroyed. Alexander looked at his wife, the woman who had manipulated him for 12 years, who had systematically abused their son, who had built an empire on the suffering of children. Victoria Tate Beck, you're under arrest for human trafficking, child abuse, conspiracy, and treason. Treason. The blackmail operation targeting federal officials constitutes espionage against the United States government. That carries special penalties. As federal agents entered the cabin to process the crime scene, Alexander felt a grim satisfaction. Victoria's network was destroyed, the children were safe, and the political officials who had enabled the operation were facing their own reckonings. But the night wasn't over yet. Alexander had one final message to deliver to anyone who might consider rebuilding what Victoria had created. Some lessons needed to be taught with permanent clarity. Chapter 6. Aftermath and Reckoning. Dawn broke over the Richmond skyline as Alexander sat in the FBI field office, watching through one-way glass as Victoria underwent her initial interrogation. She had maintained her composure through the arrest and processing, but Alexander could see cracks in her facade as the full scope of the federal charges became clear. Special Agent Roy Keller, who was leading the trafficking investigation, emerged from the interrogation room with a thick file of documents. "She's not talking," Keller said, demanded a lawyer and invoking her right to silence. What about Warren's associates? Singing like canaries. Apparently, their loyalty only extended as far as their paychecks. Keller sat down across from Alexander, his expression grim. "Mr. Beck, what we've uncovered in the past 8 hours goes beyond anything we've seen before. The blackmail network your wife was running compromised officials at every level of government." Alexander had spent the night coordinating with federal agencies as they systematically dismantled Victoria's operation. Raids on 17 locations had recovered 93 children and arrested 47 adults involved in trafficking, transportation, and client services. The political fallout was only beginning. How many officials are implicated? Initial counts suggests over 200 federal, state, and local figures. We're talking about senators, judges, police chiefs, prosecutors, people who should have been protecting children instead of exploiting them. Alexander thought about Jake, who was still recovering at the secure medical facility. Dr. Stevens had reported that the boy was making progress, but the psychological damage from months of systematic abuse would require extensive therapy. What about my son's case specifically? Victoria and Warren face federal charges for child abuse, trafficking conspiracy, and attempted sale of a minor. The evidence you gathered provides clear documentation of their intent to sell Jake to their client network. Keller paused, studying Alexander's expression. There's something else. During our raids, we discovered documentation suggesting Victoria had been planning this for years, possibly since before Jake was born. What do you mean? Medical records showing she had been administering mild sedatives to Jake since he was 6 years old. Psychological conditioning programs designed to make him compliant. Educational modifications to isolate him from potential support networks. Keller's voice hardened. Your wife wasn't just abusing your son. She was systematically preparing him for sexual slavery from early childhood. Alexander felt rage building his chest, but he kept his voice level. How is that possible? I would have noticed. She was careful. The drugs were administered in doses small enough to seem like normal childhood illnesses. The psychological conditioning was disguised as discipline and educational structure. You were traveling frequently for business, and she had complete control over Jake's daily routine. The implications were staggering. Alexander had spent years building a fortune to support his family, while Victoria used his absence to systematically destroy their son's psychological defenses. Mr. Beck, I need to ask you something directly. Keller leaned forward. The operation you conducted last night, It was extremely sophisticated, almost like it was planned by someone with extensive intelligence training. I had help from some former colleagues. I assumed as much. But I want you to understand that while we appreciate the results, the methods you used crossed several legal boundaries. Alexander met Keller's gaze directly. Are you planning to prosecute me for stopping child traffickers? I'm planning to ensure that justice is served through proper legal channels from this point forward. What about the political officials who were being blackmailed? Are they facing charges? Keller's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated. Some of them were unwilling victims, people who were compromised through coercion or deception. Others appear to have been willing participants who use the network's services regularly. And you can tell the difference. Financial records, communication logs, frequency of contact. The willing participants paid premium prices for specific services and showed no signs of attempting to escape the blackmail situation. Alexander understood the distinction, but he also understood that political pressure would protect some officials while sacrificing others. How many of the willing participants will actually face prosecution? Keller was quiet for a moment. As many as the evidence will support and political reality will allow. It was an honest answer, but not a satisfying one. Alexander had learned in intelligence work that justice and law enforcement didn't always align perfectly. His phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Stevens. Alexander, Jake's awake and asking for you. His cognitive function is improving rapidly now that the drugs are clearing his system. I'll be there in an hour. As Alexander prepared to leave the FBI office, Agent Keller handed him a business card. Mr. Beck, given your background and what you accomplished last night, the Bureau would be interested in discussing consulting opportunities. We handle a lot of cases involving organized crime and trafficking that could benefit from your particular expertise. I'll consider it. One more thing. Victoria's lawyer is already making noise about seeking custody of Jake pending her trial. Apparently, she's claiming you kidnapped him and that she was attempting to protect him from your dangerous associates. Alexander felt cold fury settle in his chest. She's claiming I kidnapped my own son. It won't hold up in court, especially given the evidence we've gathered. But it suggests she's planning to fight the custody issue aggressively. Then she's going to learn that some battles are decided outside courtrooms. Alexander left the FBI office and drove to the medical facility where Jake was recovering. His son looked smaller than usual in the hospital bed, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. Dad, are you okay? You look really tired. Alexander sat beside the bed, taking Jake's hand. I'm fine, buddy. How are you feeling? Better. Dr. Stevens says the medicine that was making me sick is almost gone from my body. What do you remember about the last few months? Jake was quiet for a moment. Mom was giving me special vitamins that made me sleepy. She said they would help me grow stronger, but they made me feel weird and confused. What else? She had friends over a lot. They would look at me like I was something they wanted to buy. It made me scared, but when I tried to tell you, the words wouldn't come out right. Alexander felt rage building again, but he kept his voice gentle. You're safe now, Jake. Mom can't hurt you anymore. What's going to happen to her? She's going to face consequences for the things she did. To you, and to other children. Jake nodded, processing this with the kind of seriousness that no 11-year-old should need to possess. Dad, I'm glad you came home when you did. I think something really bad was about to happen to me. Alexander squeezed his son's hand, making a promise that would define the rest of their lives together. Nothing bad will ever happen to you again, Jake. I promise you that. But even as he made the promise, Alexander was planning his next moves. Victoria's trial would take months, maybe years. During that time, she would have access to lawyers, appeals, and potentially corrupt officials who might arrange for her early release or case dismissal. Alexander had spent 20 years learning that some enemies were too dangerous to leave alive, regardless of what legal systems might decide. Victoria Tate Beck had made a career of destroying children's lives. She had systematically abused his son while manipulating their marriage for criminal purposes. The legal system would provide due process. Alexander would provide justice. And there was a significant difference between the two. Chapter 7. The Trap Unfolds. 3 weeks after Victoria's arrest, Alexander received an unexpected visitor at his home. Miguel had been screening all contacts since the FBI raids, but the woman who appeared at their gate carried credentials that demanded attention. Federal Judge Patricia Gates, one of the officials Alexander had seen on Victoria's blackmail list. Alexander met her in his study, noting how she kept her hands visible and her voice carefully modulated, the behavior of someone who knew she was being recorded. "Mr. Beck, I need to discuss a matter of mutual concern." "What kind of matter?" "Your wife's case. More specifically, certain complications that have arisen during the legal proceedings." Alexander waited, letting silence pressure her to reveal more than she intended. Victoria's attorney has presented evidence suggesting that her trafficking operation was actually an undercover investigation into political corruption. She claims to have been working with federal agencies to expose officials who were exploiting children. The lie was sophisticated, but Alexander had expected something like this. Victoria had spent years building relationships with corrupt officials. Using those relationships to create an escape route was predictable. What kind of evidence? Documentation that appears to show communication with FBI and CIA handlers. Financial records that could be interpreted as operational funding rather than criminal profits. Testimony from associates claiming they were undercover operatives. Alexander recognized the pattern from his intelligence days. When caught, operatives often claimed they were working for the other side. Sometimes it was even true. "What do you want from me, Judge Gates?" Victoria's attorney is claiming that you compromised a federal investigation through unauthorized vigilante action. They're seeking to have all evidence dismissed based on illegal interference with law enforcement operations. And you're here because... Judge Gates was quiet for a long moment. Because if Victoria's claims are true, then the federal investigation that exposed over 200 officials was itself compromised. Every case, every arrest, every conviction could be overturned on appeal. Alexander understood the implication. Whether Victoria was lying or telling the truth, her claims could destroy the entire legal proceeding against the trafficking network. What's your assessment of her claims? Personally, I think she's lying. But professionally, I have to consider the possibility that we're dealing with a counterintelligence operation that went bad. Or a counterintelligence operation that was always designed to protect trafficking networks rather than expose them. Judge Gates nodded grimly. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Victoria's attorney has scheduled a hearing for tomorrow where they'll present this evidence publicly. If successful, Victoria walks free and every official on her blackmail list claims they were victims of an unauthorized federal sting operation. Including you? Including me. Alexander studied Judge Gates' face, looking for signs of deception. She seemed genuinely concerned about Victoria's legal strategy, but Alexander had learned not to trust anyone who appeared on trafficking-related blackmail lists. Judge Gates, let me ask you directly, were you a willing participant in Victoria's network, or were you being blackmailed? Her answer would determine whether she left his house alive. Blackmailed. Victoria's people photographed me in a compromising situation with someone who turned out to be underage. I've been making legal decisions based on their threats for over 2 years. What kind of decisions? Dismissed cases, reduced sentences, sealed records. Anything they needed to protect their operation and their clients. Alexander made a mental note to verify her claims later, but her apparent honesty suggested she might be useful. What do you propose we do about tomorrow's hearing? That depends on whether you're prepared to testify about what you discovered during your investigation and risk having the entire case dismissed if Victoria's claims are accepted, or ensure that the truth comes out regardless of her legal maneuvering. Alexander considered the options. Victoria's escape strategy was sophisticated but not perfect. If she was claiming to be an undercover operative, she would need to explain why she had been systematically abusing Jake and preparing him for sale. Judge Gates, there's something Victoria's attorney doesn't know about the evidence I gathered. What? I have recorded conversations where Victoria explicitly discusses selling Jake to specific clients, not as part of any investigation, but as a personal transaction designed to eliminate him as a complication in her criminal operations. Judge Gates' expression shifted from concern to something approaching relief. That would destroy her undercover operative defense. It would. But I've been holding that evidence in reserve. Why? Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering how much to reveal. Because I wanted to see who would try to help her escape justice. Corrupt officials supporting her claims, defense attorneys with suspicious funding sources, federal agents who might be compromised. You're saying this entire legal proceeding has been a trap? I'm saying that catching traffickers is only half the battle. The other half is identifying everyone who enables them. Judge Gates was silent for several minutes, processing the implications. Mr. Beck, if you testify tomorrow with that evidence, Victoria's defense collapses completely. But it also means exposing whatever operation you've been running to identify compromised officials. I'm prepared for that. Are you prepared for the consequences? Some of the people on Victoria's list have enough power to make your life very difficult, even from prison. Alexander thought about Jake, who was making progress in therapy, but still woke up screaming from nightmares about special vitamins and important visitors. Judge Gates, let me ask you something. How many children do you think will suffer if Victoria's network is allowed to reorganize under new leadership? I don't know. Neither do I. But I know it's more than zero, which means the consequences of action are preferable to the consequences of inaction. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the federal courthouse wearing his best suit and carrying a briefcase containing evidence that would either ensure Victoria's conviction or trigger his own arrest for obstruction of justice. The hearing room was packed with reporters, federal agents, and observers from various political offices. Victoria sat at the defense table wearing an orange jumpsuit, but maintaining the composed expression of someone who believed she held the winning hand. When called to testify, Alexander approached the witness stand with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Victoria's attorney, William Andrews, began his questioning with barely concealed aggression. Mr. Beck, isn't it true that you conducted an unauthorized investigation into federal law enforcement operations? No. Isn't it true that you used former military personnel to interfere with ongoing federal investigations? No. Then how do you explain the systematic destruction of evidence and elimination of witnesses that occurred during your vigilante operation? Alexander looked directly at Victoria, noting how her expression had shifted from confidence to concern. I can explain it very simply. I have recorded conversations where my wife explicitly discusses selling our 11-year-old son to sexual predators for $2 million. Would you like me to play those recordings for the court? The courtroom erupted in chaos as Andrews realized his client's defense had just collapsed completely. Victoria's claims about being an undercover operative couldn't explain why she was recorded planning to sell her own child. But Alexander wasn't finished. As the judge restored order, he produced additional evidence that would ensure Victoria never had another opportunity to hurt children. Your Honor, I also have documentation showing that Mrs. Beck has been systematically drugging our son for over 5 years, along with detailed plans for his psychological conditioning and eventual sale to specific clients. Victoria's face went white as she realized the scope of Alexander's evidence. Her attorney was frantically flipping through papers, looking for some way to salvage a defense that had just been obliterated. Alexander continued his testimony for 3 hours, methodically destroying every aspect of Victoria's claims while presenting irrefutable evidence of her crimes. By the time he stepped down from the witness stand, Victoria's fate was sealed. But more importantly, Alexander had achieved his primary objective, identifying every official, attorney, and federal agent who had attempted to help Victoria escape justice. The trap had worked perfectly. Now came the consequences. Chapter 8. Justice Served. The verdicts came down exactly 6 months after Alexander's testimony. Victoria Tate Beck, life in prison without possibility of parole on 47 counts of human trafficking, child abuse, and conspiracy. Grant Warren, death penalty for murder during trafficking operations. 17 political officials, sentences ranging from 10 years to life, depending on their level of participation. Alexander sat in the courthouse gallery as each verdict was read, feeling a grim satisfaction as the legal system finally delivered consequences for crimes that had destroyed hundreds of lives. Victoria showed no emotion as her sentence was announced, maintaining the cold composure that had defined their 12-year marriage. But Alexander's work wasn't finished. During the 6 months of legal proceedings, he had continued gathering intelligence on the broader network that had enabled Victoria's operations. What he discovered was a system of corruption that extended far beyond individual criminals to include institutional failures at every level. Federal agencies had ignored warnings about trafficking operations. Political officials had traded votes for protection. Law enforcement had deliberately misdirected investigations to shield wealthy clients. The legal system had provided justice for Victoria and her immediate associates, but the structures that had enabled them remained largely intact. Alexander had decided that those structures needed to be dismantled permanently. His opportunity came when Special Agent Keller contacted him about consulting on a new trafficking case in Baltimore. The investigation involved a network similar to Victoria's, but with different leadership and different political connections. "We could use your expertise in understanding how these operations function," Keller explained during their meeting. "Your insights into Victoria's network helped us develop new investigative protocols." "What kind of consulting are you looking for?" "Undercover work. These networks only trust people with specific backgrounds and connections. Your business credentials and former military service make you an ideal candidate for infiltration operations." Alexander accepted the consulting contract, but not for the reasons Keller expected. Instead of simply gathering evidence for legal prosecution, Alexander planned to use his access to systematically destroy trafficking networks through methods that would ensure permanent results. Over the next 18 months, Alexander worked on 7 different cases across 4 states. In each situation, he gathered evidence for federal prosecutors while simultaneously implementing his own solutions for problems that the legal system couldn't address. Network leaders suffered fatal accidents. Political protectors found their careers destroyed by strategic leaks. Financial systems were disrupted through sophisticated cyber attacks. Client lists were published on dark websites frequented by vigilante groups. The results were dramatic. Trafficking operations in the Mid-Atlantic region declined by 70%. Political officials became reluctant to provide protection for criminal networks. Law enforcement agencies improved their response protocols to avoid federal oversight. Most importantly, children stopped disappearing into systems designed to exploit them. Alexander's methods were illegal, brutal, and completely effective. During this period, Jake made remarkable progress in therapy. Dr. Stevens reported that the boy's psychological recovery was proceeding better than expected, largely due to the knowledge that his abusers had faced permanent consequences. "He feels safe," Stevens explained during one of their consultations. "Not just physically safe, but psychologically safe. He knows that the people who hurt him can never hurt anyone again." Alexander had made sure of that. On the 2nd anniversary of Victoria's arrest, Alexander received a visit from Colonel Cooper, who had helped coordinate the original operation against Victoria's network. "Alexander, we need to talk about your consulting work." "What about it?" "Federal agencies are starting to notice patterns. Trafficking operations you investigate tend to suffer catastrophic failures that go beyond normal law enforcement outcomes. Criminals make enemies. Sometimes those enemies take action that the legal system can't. And sometimes former intelligence officers decide that permanent solutions are preferable to legal complications." Alexander met Cooper's gaze directly. "Are you concerned about my methods?" "I'm concerned about your exposure. What you're doing is necessary, but it's also extremely dangerous. If federal agencies decide you're operating outside legal boundaries, they'll have no choice but to prosecute. What do you recommend?" "Retire from consulting. Focus on raising Jake. Let other people handle the next phase of this work." Alexander considered Cooper's advice, but he also thought about the hundreds of children who were safe because trafficking networks no longer operated with impunity. His work had created a climate of fear among predators who had previously felt untouchable. "One more case," Alexander said. "Then I'll step back." The final case involved a network operating in Washington, D.C. that specialized in providing children to political figures. The investigation had stalled due to political interference, and federal agents suspected that high-ranking officials were actively protecting the operation. Alexander accepted the assignment, knowing it would be his most dangerous, but also potentially his most important. If successful, he could dismantle the political protection systems that enabled trafficking networks to operate with institutional support. The operation took 4 months to plan and execute. Alexander infiltrated the network by posing as a wealthy businessman seeking specialized services for political associates. His military background and legitimate business credentials provided perfect cover for accessing the highest levels of the organization. What he discovered was worse than anything he had seen in Victoria's network. The Washington operation didn't just traffic children. It used them as weapons in political warfare. Compromising photographs and recordings were used to control senators, judges, and cabinet officials. The network had effectively captured significant portions of the federal government through systematic blackmail. Alexander's solution was correspondingly comprehensive. On a single night in December, 17 network leaders died in apparent accidents. A massive cyber attack destroyed all electronic records and financial systems. Client lists were simultaneously released to major news organizations and law enforcement agencies. Political officials found themselves facing federal investigations they couldn't suppress or influence. Within 72 hours, the entire network had collapsed. The political fallout lasted for months. 23 federal officials resigned in disgrace. 37 faced criminal charges. Congress passed emergency legislation increasing penalties for trafficking crimes and eliminating political immunity for related offenses. Most importantly, the institutional protection systems that had enabled trafficking networks were permanently disrupted. Alexander's consulting career ended as quietly as it had begun. He returned to Richmond, to his legitimate business interests, and to the daily work of raising a son who was finally free from the shadows of his early trauma. But the message had been sent and received throughout the criminal underworld. Children were no longer unprotected victims. They had defenders who would use any means necessary to ensure their safety. And some of those defenders had learned their skills in places where mercy was a luxury that enemies couldn't afford. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 5 years after Victoria's conviction, Alexander stood in the yard of their new home in Colorado, watching Jake practice baseball with a high school team. At 16, the boy had grown into a confident young man whose easy smile and natural athleticism gave no hint of the trauma he'd survived in childhood. The move to Colorado had been Jake's idea. After finishing therapy and establishing a strong support network in Richmond, he'd expressed interest in starting fresh somewhere with mountains and clean air. Alexander had been happy to relocate, using the sale of his consulting firm to purchase a ranch outside Denver where they could build the life they'd never had the chance to create. Dr. Stevens had maintained contact throughout Jake's recovery, providing guidance and support as the boy processed his experiences and developed healthy coping mechanisms. His final assessment had been remarkably positive. Jake showed no lasting psychological damage from his mother's abuse, largely because he understood that justice had been served and that his father would always protect him. "Dad, watch this," Jake called out, connecting solidly with a fastball and sending it sailing over the fence. "Great swing, son. Coach Peterson's going to love that power." Jake had been recruited by 3 Division I programs, but he'd already decided to attend the University of Colorado, where he could study criminology while staying close to home. His interest in law enforcement came naturally from his experiences, but Alexander had been careful to encourage rather than pressure his son's career choices. The ranch house was comfortable but not ostentatious, reflecting Alexander's preference for privacy over display. He'd kept his wealth quiet, using it primarily to ensure Jake's security and education while maintaining a lifestyle that wouldn't attract unwanted attention. Alexander's phone buzzed with a call from Agent Keller, who had remained in contact despite Alexander's retirement from consulting work. "Alexander, I want to give you an update on something you'll find interesting." "What's that?" Victoria died in prison last week. Apparent suicide, though there are some questions about the circumstances. Alexander felt no emotion beyond mild satisfaction. Questions. She was found hanging in her cell, but the autopsy showed evidence of struggle. Other inmates reported hearing arguing earlier that evening. Any investigation? Officially, yes. Unofficially, Victoria had made enough enemies among trafficking survivors that prison justice seems like a reasonable explanation. Alexander had learned that some forms of justice operated outside courtrooms and legal proceedings. Victoria's death meant she could never escape, never appeal, never manipulate the system for early release. How's the trafficking situation overall? Significantly improved. The networks you helped dismantle haven't reorganized, and new operations are much smaller and less sophisticated. Your work created a climate where trafficking is genuinely dangerous for the criminals involved. Good. Alexander, there's something else. The FBI has been tracking some unusual activities in international trafficking networks. Operations being systematically destroyed by unknown actors using military-grade tactics. Any thoughts on who might be responsible? Alexander smiled grimly. Sounds like someone learned that protecting children requires permanent solutions. The methods are remarkably similar to what happened with Victoria's network, almost like they were planned by someone with extensive intelligence training, or by someone who understands that some enemies are too dangerous to leave alive. Keller was quiet for a moment. Well, whoever's responsible, they're getting results. Child trafficking in North America has declined by over 60% in the past 5 years. After the call ended, Alexander walked to his home office where he maintained files on international trafficking networks that were still operating. His retirement from official consulting hadn't ended his interest in protecting children. It had simply made his methods more direct and less encumbered by legal constraints. The network he was currently studying operated out of Eastern Europe, trafficking children throughout the international market. The leaders were protected by corrupt government officials and sophisticated security measures that made traditional law enforcement ineffective. But Alexander had learned that no security measures were sufficient against someone with unlimited resources and complete commitment to permanent solutions. His phone rang again, this time with a call from Jake. Dad, I'm staying for extra practice tonight. Coach wants to work on my defensive positioning. Sound good. I'll pick you up at 8. Actually, Sarah's mom is driving her home anyway, so she can drop me off. That way you don't have to make the trip. Alexander smiled at his son's consideration. Jake had developed into a thoughtful young man who balanced independence with respect for family commitments. Okay, but call when you're on your way home. Will do. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son. As evening approached, Alexander prepared for the kind of work that had become his true calling. The Eastern European network had operations in 12 countries, generated over $200 million annually, and destroyed thousands of children's lives every year. Within 6 months, it would cease to exist. Alexander had learned that some problems required business solutions, negotiation, compromise, legal frameworks. Other problems required military solutions, precise application of overwhelming force against enemies who understood only strength. Child trafficking fell into the second category. The phone call came at exactly 9:15 p.m. as Alexander was finalizing his operational planning. Mr. Beck, this is Colonel Nicholas Weeks, U.S. Special Operations Command. We need to meet. About what? About a job offer that would allow you to continue your current activities with official sanction and unlimited resources. Alexander set down his files and walked to the window overlooking the ranch where he'd built a new life with his son. What kind of job offer? The kind that involves protecting children on a global scale using methods that traditional law enforcement can't employ. Alexander thought about Jake, who was building his own future based on justice and protection rather than victimization and fear. He thought about Victoria, whose death had closed a chapter but not ended the story. He thought about the thousands of children who were still trapped in networks that operated with impunity because no one was willing to use truly effective methods. When do we meet? Tomorrow. There's a situation in Thailand that requires immediate attention. Alexander looked at the files on his desk, intelligence on trafficking networks that would continue destroying lives until someone with sufficient commitment decided to end them permanently. I'll be there. As he prepared for what would likely be his final transition from private citizen to active operator, Alexander felt the same certainty that had guided him through Victoria's destruction and everything that followed. Some enemies could be negotiated with, some could be reformed, some could be contained through legal measures. Others simply needed to be eliminated. Alexander Beck had become very good at making those distinctions, and even better at implementing the solutions that each situation required. The war for children's safety would never truly end, but Alexander had learned that some battles could be won so decisively that the enemy never recovered. Tomorrow, he would begin winning a new set of battles. Tonight, he would enjoy dinner with his son, secure in the knowledge that their life together had been built on a foundation of justice that no enemy could ever destroy. Some stories ended with forgiveness and reconciliation. This one ended with the understanding that evil required permanent consequences, and that some fathers were willing to become whatever was necessary to protect the children who depended on them. Alexander Beck had found his true calling, and it would define the rest of his life. 10 years later, Jake Beck would graduate from the FBI Academy and begin his own career protecting children from predators. He would never know the full extent of his father's international activities, but he would understand that some forms of justice operated outside courtrooms and legal systems. Alexander Beck's official record would show a successful businessman who consulted occasionally on federal trafficking cases. His unofficial record would be written in the destroyed networks and eliminated threats that made the world safer for innocent children.